Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, have you ever wondered how your backyard or garden can help to save wildlife? Or why something as simple as leaving your leaves where they fall can make a big difference for local ecosystems? And what role does media play from television to online platforms in conservation efforts? Well, today's guest is David Mizejewski, who's a naturalist, author, and television presenter for the National Wildlife Federation. And David has spent years educating the public on how small, everyday actions can help to protect wildlife. He's here to talk about his exciting career and the Leave the Leaves campaign, which encourages homeowners to repurpose their fallen leaves to support biodiversity. We'll discuss his career journey, why TV is such a powerful tool for conservation, and how you can get involved with wildlife-friendly initiatives in your own backyard. Plus, we dive into David's experiences on popular TV shows like Conan, RuPaul's Drag Race, and Good Morning America, and how he uses media to inspire people to take action. It's an inspiring, it's an educational, and it's a practical podcast. Enjoy.
My name is David Mizejewski, and my job title is naturalist at the National Wildlife Federation.
Right. Wonderful. Good to have you on the podcast. Thanks for kind of sharing your time with us here today. We're here to talk about a few things today. Your really interesting career and the work that you're doing right now. There's particular aspects of Leave the Leaves campaign, which we'll talk about in more detail about kind of leaving the leaves on the lawn for the benefit of wildlife. But I think a good place to start would be, can you just tell us a little bit about the National Wildlife Federation? You know, for people who've never heard of it before, what is it?
Absolutely. That's actually always where I start. So the National Wildlife Federation is one of the oldest and largest wildlife conservation and education organizations, nonprofit organizations here in the US. We've been around since 1936, and it's our mission to ensure that wildlife and people thrive in a rapidly changing world. And of course, we human beings are really the primary cause of most of that rapid change that is kind of bad news for lots of our fellow species and quite honestly for a lot of us as well. And so we are a true federation from the very beginning, meaning that we are a national nonprofit organization. We've got regional offices all around the country, but we actually partner with a different conservation group in every state and territory. And by doing that, by federating together, we really sort of amplify all of our voices for the cause of conservation. And it's a pretty powerful thing because the National Wildlife Federation has always been an organization that has sort of focused on bringing sometimes very, diverse and disparate groups together, focusing on our shared love of wildlife and nature and, the commitment to making sure we have a future where that still exists. And so, some of our state affiliates or regional affiliates, what we call, they range the gamut from, really traditional, hunting and fishing groups kind of thing, all the way to super green, progressive, climate change oriented, clean energy groups, right? And so it makes for interesting annual meetings sometimes because, not everybody always agrees on everything. But again, at the end of the day, it's a very powerful thing to be able to bring our voice, say, for example, to Washington, D.C. and say, look, guys, like we have real unity on these issues. And it's really important for us to be able to move that needle forward. And that's something I think that's very unique about the National Wildlife Federation. I don't think a lot of groups can do that. The other thing that we are kind of known for, in addition to, again, being that sort of voice for wildlife, is, maybe at that big picture policy advocacy level, is the National Wildlife Federation's work to connect people, particularly young people, to nature. So a lot of folks listening out there might have grown up reading, for example, Ranger Rick magazine. Or Zoo Book magazines. Those are both published by the National Wildlife Federation. And, little teaser for when we get into my personal background, I grew up reading those magazines.
Right, okay.
So we also have a whole sort of suite of programs and campaigns designed to help get kids in particular connected to nature, whether it's in their school environment through our Eco Schools USA program, or whether it's more informally through efforts like our Great American Campout that are really just about, again, trying to encourage kids and families and people of all ages really to just get outside and experience nature, to one of our signature programs, which is really kind of a movement. And it's the thing that brought me to the National Wildlife Federation, which is our Garden for Wildlife work. This
Hmm.
idea that we all have an opportunity to steward and shepherd our own piece of the earth, our own yards and other garden spaces, literally right outside our door, in a way that kind of supports life and supports nature and reconnects the human landscape back into the local ecology. So the
Mm.
National Wildlife Federation, we're sort of doing all of those kinds of work, the policy and the fun connecting to nature and sort of the local ecology work. And yeah, that's kind of the National Wildlife Federation in a nutshell.
That's great. It's such a clear, yeah, definition as well, such a clear explanation. I guess what I'm hearing is it's about the economies of scale when people and organizations come together and the benefits you can have when you join up. You have a clear, united message, whether that's advocacy and policy and people in Washington, D.C., or whether that's communicating to the public, to members, to whoever it might be. Is that really what you're looking to? That's the reason why people come together and actually form part of the Federation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for an organization that has been around for as long as we have,
Yeah.
and, we're sort of on the largest side for a nonprofit conservation organization. So we have the ability to sort of operate at those different scales. But, given those realities, yes, it's a strategy, right? It's an effective way of kind of chipping away at some of these issues, which quite frankly are huge
Mm,
and they can feel insurmountable. And sometimes, especially when you don't get that win on the bigger picture policy level, it's the little actions that not only kind of make a difference at that small scale, but keep hope alive.
mm,
I mean, to be able
mm,
to go outside in my own yard and, for example, plant some milkweed to serve as the caterpillar host plant for the monarch butterfly,
mm,
which has had a precipitous decline in just the last 20 or 30 years, so much so that it's almost certainly going to be listed and protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act
mm,
sometime in the coming months. To be able to think about the fact that this glorious, iconic, beautiful, once common, beautiful butterfly species that everybody knows and loves is
mm,
literally teetering on the brink is overwhelming. But when I go outside and I plant that milkweed and I actually see the female monarch show up and lay eggs on it, holy cow, like that is motivational to me. That
mm,
keeps me wanting to do more.
mm.
And that is kind of, you said it. It's operating at those different levels, those different scales. But I think it's really important if you can to hit all of those levels because that's how we move the needle long term.
Yeah. And I think sort of messages of hope are so important to people. I think we get a lot of doom and gloom, and that's what tends to kind of capture the media's, yeah, perspective. That's the messages that they're putting out there. But actually, what we need as individuals is hope and action. So yeah, I hope we can do something about the monarchs, and the action is we can plant the milkweed. And it's the crafting of messages like that, which is really what your career is all about.
Yeah, it really is in many ways. And I'm sure we're going to get into it in a little bit more detail, but
Yeah.
like too long didn't listen, whatever the acronym for that is. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really in a nutshell what my career is. I started
Yeah.
in sort of the traditional kind of environmentalist route, and really thought I was going to get involved at the advocacy level.
Yeah.
And I my career took a few left turns, and here I am now, a quarter century plus later, and my job is really as a naturalist to be an interpreter of the natural world. And I have learned so much starting from that like traditional nonprofit advocacy point of view
Hmm.
to somebody that goes on late night television and hosts TV series on Animal Planet and Nat Geo Wild, and the radical difference in how the approaches to communicating and educating and inspiring people from those two sort of ends of the spectrum are. And
Hmm.
my career really has sort of been a story of like bringing those two things together and
Mm.
figuring out ways to, learn from each other from those different ways of communicating, sort
Mm.
of entertainment media, news media versus science and sort of policy. And, where do those things meet in the middle? And how do you communicate about them effectively to not just sort of say the messages that you want to say, but to do it in a way that actually engages people
Mm.
and inspires behavior change, because that's really
Mm.
what it's all about. So
Mm.
it's sort of like meshing entertainment media, news media, science,
Mm.
uh, in natural history interpretation, and the hard science, but also the social science and
Mm,
marketing, right? And
mm,
mashing that all together into, just sort of a more effective way at getting people to care about these incredibly important conservation issues that are facing our planet, our fellow species, and
mm,
us too.
mm. Yeah, I was reading your background and the work you do. It's incredible, like some of the shows you've been on and some of the things that you've presented as well. I've seen things like Conan and Ellen and RuPaul's Drag Race and all sorts
Yep.
of stuff where you wouldn't typically think about seeing a wildlife presenter, actually, or even conservation messages being presented. Tell us, like, what, I've got loads of questions around that. But first of all, what's it like to go in some of these kind of big, yeah, entertainment shows? And secondly, how do you prepare to like deliver a meaningful kind of conservation message within that sort of environment?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in there. I guess I'll
Yeah.
start by saying um, the way that my career has developed at the National Wildlife Federation is that getting the opportunity to step outside of the traditional nonprofit
Mm,
conservation advocacy, Washington, D.C. based science focused bubble
mm,
of that sort of conservation world and getting into the entertainment media bubble when I first had the opportunity to, step in front of camera, and I'll tell you that whole story because it's kind of funny. Um, the like the thing that I learned from that is a new way again of communicating, and so out of that, what I learned is that we can be much more effective, and I can be much more effective in my job at communicating, at educating, at inspiring action if we embrace those opportunities, those non-traditional opportunities, to go on a late night talk show, or again, go on a reality show like RuPaul's Drag Race, which was
mm.
one of my most favorite appearances that I've ever done. Like that's where we need to be.
Yeah.
Conservation is not something that is just the domain of, the stereotype of like the crunchy hippie people and the tree huggers, right? Like those people, that those are my people, right? Like that's where I come
Mm,
from. But like there's not enough of us to change this stuff, right? We have to
mm,
be reaching people where they are. We have to be reaching people that never thought about this before. We have
mm,
to be taking a page from, for profit, you know,
mm,
money focused
mm,
marketing and social marketing, right? Like
mm,
that's how we're going to do it, right? We're not
mm,
just going to win or make these changes by just preaching to the choir
mm,
and navel gazing at ourselves and
mm.
staying in our ivory tower, right?
Yeah.
So my perspective is if there's an opportunity for me to get out there into the world,
Mm,
whether it's on television, whether it's on a streaming platform, whether it's doing a podcast, whether it's making my own digital content, I don't really care what it is. My
mm,
goal is to reach you and
mm,
everybody out there that's watching this or listening to this right now,
mm.
because I can't reach you in the old traditional ways of nonprofit communications, right? We put a press release out. That's great, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like you've given me a great opportunity to come on your show and just sort of talk about this stuff, and you've got an audience that I don't otherwise reach. So I'm going to come here, and my job is to give you a good show, a good episode, right? And talk about stuff that's going to keep people's interest. And again, hopefully along the way, they're going to pick up some new information, some new inspiration, some new hope.
Yeah.
And hopefully they'll translate that into action, behavior change, and the things that we really need to be doing if we're going to save, again, our fellow species and our clean air and our water and save ourselves. That's what we say at the National Wildlife Federation, by the way, is
Mm,
that when we save wildlife and we save nature, we're really saving ourselves too. And that theme of the integration and the interrelation between nature, wildlife, and human beings is really kind of at the core of our organizational identity. And really, it's kind of the definition of ecology, which just thrills me. It gets me very excited. That's what I studied. And um, so yeah, to answer your question more specifically, how do I get prepared and what's it like going on some of these shows where you don't generally, see people like me from a conservation world? Um, well, number one, I'm going to share something that people find shocking is that I'm actually a natural introvert.
mm,
Um, and the only reason that I'm able to go on these shows or quite honestly be here with you today is that um, I feel so passionately about the stuff that we're talking about,
mm,
and it's coming from my heart. And so it's like I'm just being me right now. Like
mm,
I'm not an actor, right? When I go on, Conan O'Brien or the Today Show or any of these other shows that I've done over the years on, again, Animal Planet, Nat Geo Wild. I've guest hosted a few episodes of the new national Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom series that is just entering into its second season. Like I can only do those things because I'm being invited to be on there as me, and I'm not faking it. And so
Yeah.
in that way, it's very easy. If you ask me to talk about something that I'm not very familiar with or passionate about. So, for example, sports. I know nothing about sports. Growing up, I played sports, but I was never diehard into it. I was much more interested in running around in the woods and climbing trees and catching frogs and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, like, you put me in front of the camera and ask me a question about that, and I will clam up. I will get panic attacks. Like, I don't want it. When I'm done with sort of being on like this, like I'm one of those people that needs to go sit in a quiet room for a few hours and decompress. And the older I get, the more I learn that about myself and have
Yeah.
the sort of the self-care to know that I need that recovery time because I am naturally an introvert. But I guess you can call me an extroverted introvert in that sense,
Yeah.
whatever that means. But so I always approach these big on camera, quite honestly, high pressure because I'm
Yeah.
standing in front of millions and millions of people from grounding myself in just what I was saying. Like, this is me. This is what I know. This is what I care about. And I have this awesome opportunity to do what I love doing, which is essentially being a nature geek. And that's, people always ask me, how'd you get into, how did you end up here? Right. And I always start by saying, I was born this way. And I say that, kind of as a joke, but also very seriously, because I
Mhm.
do feel I sort of was a person that was born with an innate love and draw to nature. I think
Mhm.
many of us are that way. I think all of us are that way on some
Mhm.
level. But for me, it was very powerful. And because I was lucky enough as a kid to be able to run around in the woods and again climb the trees and catch the frogs, I that youth experience and connection to nature really kind of solidified that and kind of helped me get to where I am today.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I go on camera, it's about channeling that inner nature geek,
Mhm.
and it's about preparation.
Mhm.
I mean, anybody who's successful in any industry will probably tell you you got to do your work, right? You got to practice, you got to hone your craft, you have to know the information. And
Mhm.
so I do a lot of prep work. I am blessed to be one of those people that naturally absorbs knowledge about nature. In many ways, I'm a self-taught naturalist in the
Mhm.
sense that so much of what I know is from personal observation or from learning from mentors versus like sort of in school book training kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so, but I don't have every detail about every wildlife species and conservation issue right here in the front of my brain. I have to prep. So I
Yeah.
do my research. I fact check. I write things out. I know what I need to do to prep so that when I'm standing in front of a live TV camera with millions of people watching me, when my mouth opens, the right information dumps out, right? And that's really, really important. And that's a bit of advice that I have for anybody doing really anything. If you're nervous about public speaking,
Yeah.
if you're nervous about potential media opportunities, it's relax yourself, practice, adopt all those relaxation techniques, breathing exercises, all that kind of stuff. Preparation, preparation, preparation is so key because look, if you're prepared, you know what you all the information.
Yeah.
What do you have to be worried about, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
know what you need to say and do. And again, being unprepared for me is anxiety inducing.
Mhm.
So I think if you have those things, the relaxation techniques, the preparation, the rest of it is kind of the easy part.
Mhm.
And when I do these shows, I have learned the importance of going with the flow.
Mhm.
Every single host or celebrity that I've encountered is different. And so when you start doing some of these shows, especially when you get the opportunity to come back as a repeated guest, you kind of learn how the different people work. So, for example, I was a regular on the Martha Stewart show when she had her daytime talk show, and I was on every season for a couple different appearances. And Martha is Martha, and she does things the way that she does. She likes accuracy and detail, and
Mhm.
she likes to be sort of interactive. Um, when I used to do Conan O'Brien for his late night talk show, which I was also a regular on for most of the duration, what I learned is that Conan is very much a physical comedian, but he's not a slapstick as much as he is sort of like it's almost like dry humor. It's almost like facial expression. It's almost like pantomime. So if
Mm,
you watch Conan, so much of his humor is about his facial expressions
hmm.
and the quiet where the camera can just focus on him and he can make his eyebrow go up or his hair do something weird or he looks, in my case, oftentimes I was bringing ambassador animals on to share with the audience. And so knowing that I had to give Conan breathing room to do his job so that he could have a successful show is what helped make me successful. So I don't know how that translates to other people's experiences in their jobs or their careers or other facets of conservation. But I guess really, if I was going to distill that down, I guess it's sort of know your audience.
Yeah,
And if, the audience are the people that are listening, but in a way, like you're my audience too today, Nick,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I need to give you what you need to do your job well too.
yeah.
So I'm focused on you, but I'm also focused on the listener. So if you learn how to do that, you can be really successful at this on camera stuff.
Yeah, which you clearly are. Yeah, I mean, what I heard there was like, know yourself, lean into yourself, be honest, be transparent, be who you are. And it's interesting to hear that someone so outgoing is an introvert. I'm
People
an
are always
introvert
shocked
too,
by it.
yeah, but we put ourselves in these situations and thrive in them. So I find that really interesting. Know your subject matter really well. Like, yeah, put in the reps, like be prepared. And then you mentioned it a few times there about really understanding the people you're speaking to, whether that's the audience or the host, whoever that might be. Yeah. And I think that's a really, really valuable things. And what I love about what you're doing, which I haven't seen really many times at all, is you really are sort of preaching to the unconverted. There's this old saying, which is, if we keep doing what we've always done, you can't expect anything different, essentially, right? Yeah. And you are doing things differently, which is going to hopefully create like new impacts for people, reaching new audiences in new ways, which is what we need as a movement, right?
100%. You sort of hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've actually been very blessed, especially being in the public sphere and the public eye, to really feel very supported. And I've very rarely been, the 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 focus of the usual social media nastiness and attacks and whatever. As a general rule, I mean, it has happened. But I think about, you sort of highlighted something that I think is really important, is sort of knowing your audience and meeting them where they are.
Mm,
And so I got an email several years ago, and I don't can't even remember what it was specifically in response to. It was something I know about plants. And so going back to I was mentioning the National Wildlife Federation's Garden for Wildlife movement and our programs that engage people in this idea of restoring nature by what you plant in your yard, in your garden space, in your neighborhood. And that really starts with the indigenous native plants
hmm.
that co-evolve with the wildlife because they're in sync with each other, right? And so a lot of my work over the years has been in that space, right? In that sort of intersection between wild animals and wild plants and everything, right? And so, but to your point, I am largely speaking to the average person, the person who, isn't a botanist, who might not even know what a native plant is. And, the places that I have the biggest opportunities to move the needle is the places where people are not experts, right? And so I got an email from a gentleman who I don't know who he is. He clearly comes from probably the horticulture side of things, maybe even the botany side of things. And this kind of blows my mind. He felt the need to spend, some time out of his life to write me an email and basically, criticizing me for not only using Latin names to describe plant species. And I just had to laugh because certainly everything that I do, I want to be grounded in science. And there is incredible value in reinforcing just sort of the tenets of good science. And there's a reason why we have scientific names, right? Because it does add clarity and it's really, really important. Um, and so I don't disagree with him on that.
Mm,
However, what I know from my, again, not insignificant experience doing this, and what I know from getting outside of the science bubble, where, scientists talk to themselves and nothing ever happens, right? What I know is that if I start coming in and only speaking in Latin, I will immediately lose two-thirds of the audience.
Yeah.
And I kind of have another principle that I've sort of adopted, and that is that much rather be effective than right,
Mm, love that.
right? So I'm going to be accurate, but I, I want to move the needle. I want to reach people. I want to get people engaged. I want to get like that is what I'm trying to do. And
Yeah.
so if I am a stickler, if I'm again sitting in my ivory tower for a very, very strict scientific discipline and using only Latin names, for example, I'm not going to be successful. I might be right.
Mm,
I might be correct. I might be accurate, but that's not gonna do the job. So
yeah.
I'm sorry, dude. Like, you know, thank you for your input. I didn't even respond because
Yeah.
I don't that kind of person, I'm probably not going to be able to change their mind, and I have more important things to spend my life's energy on. So anyway, that's just like one little example of something that I've
Yeah.
learned. Now, again, if I were speaking at a scientific conference,
Hmm.
or if I was a scientist, which I'm not, I have a Bachelor of Arts
Hmm.
in Human and Natural Ecology
Hmm.
and political science. The ecology program that I did at Emory University is really more of like an environmental studies,
Hmm. Hmm.
multidisciplinary. So, I did study conservation biology and, sort of energy, fossil fuels and the science behind all of that. But I also studied religion and ecology
Hmm.
and history of the conservation movement in North America
Mm,
and environmental communications and so on and so forth. So I'm not a scientist. I'm not doing, primary research and publishing or any of that kind of stuff. I'm a science communicator. I'm a naturalist. That's really basically the same thing. It's sort of
yeah.
the modern word for what everybody going back to Charles Darwin, to Jane Goodall, to Steve Irwin,
Yeah. Yeah.
and everybody who's much less famous than them. Anybody can be a naturalist.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to go to school for that. But at any rate, if I was speaking in those spaces, absolutely.
Mm,
I'm going to follow the best protocol for those audiences. But when I'm on television and I'm trying to reach, your mother and your niece who's 14 and get them to care about this stuff,
hmm.
that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Meet them where they are. I love that.
right.
Yeah. Let's talk Leave the Leaves. Yeah. So you guys have got a campaign on the go right now in the month of October. We are towards the end of the month of October, but I have a garden full of leaves in front of me if I kind of turn around. And it is my job at the moment to sweep those leaves up. Um, Convince me otherwise.
Yeah. So yeah, the National Wildlife Federation has designated the month of October as Leave the Leaves Month. And this is sort of one of our new campaigns under this broader Garden for Wildlife native plant habitat movement that we started all the way back in 1973.
Mm.
We really kind of kicked it off in this country. Back in the UK, as you might know, folks have been really into this idea of sort of garden habitat and,
Yeah.
making habitats for hedgehogs and all the songbirds and everything. So we kind of followed your lead, but we've been doing this at the National
You're
Wildlife.
welcome, by the way. You're very welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I credit, sort of, the wind in the willows and, all of those sort
Yeah.
of fairy tale, humanized animals, creatures in British literature, Beatrix Potter and everybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but at any rate, we've been doing this at the National Wildlife Federation for over 50 years at this point. And so, this newest, kind of campaign that we've done is really just trying to capture a moment. So,
Mm.
it's funny. I recently was cleaning out, old emails and whatever, you know how things build up. And I found an email, I want to say from like 2002 or 2003, where I was emailing with a journalist about the value of keeping sort of our fallen leaves on our property. So even the Leave the Leaves message is not a new thing.
Hmm.
But we sort of hit this moment last year when we just were seeing this momentum building. I wrote a couple of blog posts or worked with colleagues on a few blog posts back in 2014 and 2015. And that is the moment, I think that was sort of the tipping point because those blog posts which were of course about why we should be keeping our leaves, and I'm going to tell you all of those reasons in a second.
Mm.
But ever since then it's sort of been building, and now we're seeing lots of other organizations, our wonderful sister organizations, the competition, kind of also getting in on this leave the leaves message, and that's great. Actually, there's space for all of us. I'm joking about it, but anyway, we just realized, and this is sort of an example of what we've been talking about meeting people where they are, about realizing when opportunity exists, about realizing when there's sort of like kind of like a momentum and a critical mass of media interest. Like, let's not just do sort of the one-off messaging. Let's make a campaign. Let's do it focused.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all month long, I've been doing, media interviews in a very concentrated way, lots of podcasts, the New York Times and USA Today always run stories. So I'm usually quoted in those. And the Weather Channel always has me on and that kind of thing. Although this year, sadly, with the extreme weather and the hurricanes in the U.S. South, they've been focused on that, and that, of course, is where
Hmm.
they should be focused. But at any rate, yeah, so that's what we're doing. We're trying to promote this idea, this, strange to many people idea of you can actually leave your leaves on your property and not throw them away in the fall.
Hmm.
And to most people, even today, even though there is this momentum building, that is a radical idea. Like, what? Huh? Wait, I don't have to like rake them and get rid of them and throw them out. And so that shock value in and of itself is an opportunity, right? And so there's really three main reasons um, why this is an important thing and why the National Wildlife Federation is interested in what people do in their yard with their leaves, right?
Hmm.
So before I tell you those reasons, there's one thing that I have learned because I've been misquoted so many times in media interviews that I always want to start with. And that is pointing out that yard does not automatically equal lawn.
Hmm.
Okay. And
Hmm.
what I've learned over the years from experience is that for many people, it does, right? In their vernacular, those are the same thing,
Hmm.
right? And so I want to start by pointing out, because this is going to be important when I get to sort of the practical, like, what are we actually asking you to do here?
Hmm.
Yard and lawn are not the same thing. Your yard is the space, or in the UK, you guys call it your garden, right?
Yeah.
And so, yard, garden, whatever you want to call it, that is your piece of land, whether that's 5 acres, whether it's a little postage stamp urban backyard,
Hmm.
it could even be a container garden on a rooftop or a balcony, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't matter. When we talk about leaving your leaves and we say, keep them in your yard, keep them on your property, what I'm not saying is letting a huge pile of leaves build up on your lawn.
Hmm.
And that's the misquote.
Hmm.
So I always see the headlines always read National Wildlife Federation naturalist says it's okay to leave the leaves on your lawn. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying keep them on your property.
Hmm.
I'm going to unpack this for you in a second here. So, but let's talk about why it's important to keep those leaves. Number one, incredibly important wildlife habitat. The natural leaf layer that forms in nature is home for literally probably millions, at least hundreds of thousands invertebrate species. Everything from earthworms, which everybody, that's kind of intuitive, right? Oh yeah, when you dig in the garden, you see in the soil and the earthworms are eating those leaves and composting them. Some of my favorites are isopods.
Hmm.
Depending on where you're from, you call them roly-polies or pill bugs or sow bugs or potato bugs, whatever. These are these little sort of land crustaceans which actually breathe through gills.
Hmm.
And as a result, they need to live in these moist environments,
Hmm.
which that natural leaf layer is because it acts a little bit like a sponge and it stays moist, right? And they're actually in there eating the leaves and also detoxifying the soil. Those little guys have the ability to sort of break down heavy metals, right? So like they're really cool to have around. But beyond those, which I think a lot of people are already familiar with and kind of probably intuitively get, oh yeah, they live in those fallen leaves as they're breaking down. Think about creatures like fireflies, beautiful insects that fly around. They
Hmm.
flash these beautiful lights. If you live in the eastern parts of the US, it's like one of the most beautiful natural phenomenon that you can actually ever see anywhere, right?
Hmm.
Well, that's great, but even though we call them fireflies or lightning bugs, they're neither bugs nor flies. They're actually beetles.
Hmm.
Um, Flies and bugs are actually different orders of insects, and beetles start out life after they hatch from their eggs as grubs, beetle grubs, and or larvae, and they in for fireflies live under the leaf layer.
Hmm.
So if you want to see those beautiful fireflies in the summer, you have to be keeping a natural leaf layer somewhere on your property so
Mhm.
that they can complete their life cycle. Bumblebees, bumblebee queens at this time of year are, the hives are dying down. Those queens are mating and they're burying themselves underneath those leaves as well.
Mm.
The one that really shocks people are butterflies and moths. You think about, oh, butterfly garden, plant a bunch of pretty flowers. Maybe if you're a little bit more advanced, you know about caterpillar host plants, the only food that those caterpillars can eat, like the monarch butterfly and the milkweed. Well, what happens at this time of year, particularly with our moths, which, by the way, are much more numerous than butterflies? Butterflies evolved from moths, so there's far
Mhm.
fewer species. So just sort of ecologically, moths are kind of more important just because there's more species of them, there's more volume of them doing the pollination work that they do, et cetera. But at any rate, in some places like the eastern US, 94% of our moth species, the last sort of generation that's happening now, drop off of their caterpillar host plant,
Mhm.
pupate, and they overwinter in the leaves,
Mm. Right.
right?
Yeah.
So again, consider the fact that these are important pollinators, and come spring, those moths and some butterfly species do this as well. They're going to emerge and they're going to keep their life cycle going.
Mhm.
And 96% of our backyard birds, all the birds that you want to attract and see and hear, feed their babies a diet exclusively of insects and other invertebrates. And guess which group are most important for them?
Mm.
Moth caterpillars.
Mm.
And it takes a lot. There was a study done a few years ago looking at Carolina chickadees that found that one pair of Carolina chickadees, between hatching and fledging of their babies over, like, two plus weeks, not much longer than that, needed to catch between 6 and 9,000 insects in that short time frame just to raise one nest of babies, right?
Mhm.
So knowing that the birds rely on those caterpillars, and knowing that the caterpillars and moths rely on the natural leaf layer, if you throw away all your leaves right now in the fall, you
Mm.
are literally wiping out and throwing in the garbage an entire next generation of pollinators and the food source for the birds in the spring,
Mm.
in order to keep their populations going. And when you know that, and you hear things like the North American bird population has plummeted by 3 billion birds with a B overall. Almost a third of the population has gone since 1970. We talk about the monarch butterfly
Yeah.
rapidly disappearing. We talk about pollinator decline, and be like, the getting rid of the leaves is a piece of that puzzle, along with expanding lawns and pesticides and whatever. So anyway, that's just the invertebrates as far as wildlife goes. I know we don't have time to get way more into the weeds on it, but just I'll quickly mention some other species. Amphibians like salamanders need moist environments. Frogs and toads, they live in the leaf layer. All sorts of cool little mammals, from chipmunks to shrews, which are like so
Mm.
cool. Anybody, like, just go look up shrews, and you'll instantly fall in love with them.
Mm.
They're basically
I know
bad.
them well. They're great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then, there are birds that nest in the leaves, like oven birds. They don't nest up in the trees. They nest in the leaf layer on the ground. Again, the list goes on and on and on. So the point is that your natural leaf layer is really important wildlife habitat. So that's reason number one. Reason number two actually has to do with climate change. So stick with me for 1 second and I'll explain how this works. Like, what the heck do fallen leaves have to do with global climate change? So climate change, it's caused by the buildup of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, largely carbon dioxide, which comes from burning fossil fuels, deforestation, et cetera. But there's another greenhouse gas that is something like 28 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is, and that's methane. Methane is one of the main producers of it, is our landfills. And methane gets produced in landfills when we bury organic matter,
Mm.
including our leaves. And again, you might think, well, how much methane could be produced? Well, every year, this is according to the US EPA, numbers from 2018, they recorded 35.5 million tons of yard waste enters the municipal waste stream every year.
Mm.
And of that, about 10.5 million tons, that is a lot of yard waste, which is made up largely of fallen leaves, gets buried in our landfills. Underground, no oxygen. It breaks down in those anaerobic conditions and produces methane.
Mm.
Landfills are the third largest source of methane pollution in the US.
Mm.
So, something as simple as your choice this fall on what to do with your fallen leaves can actually have a bigger, tie to this global issue. Now, is that going to solve climate change, leaving your leaves? No. We need those big picture solutions.
Mm.
But this is an opportunity for all of us to make those small personal choices that do make a little bit of a difference. And when I do them and you do them and the neighbors do them and the town does them, it actually does add up and it can be an important part of the solution.
Yeah.
And the last reason is very simple. They're free, right? The fallen leaves are free. In nature, they drop from the trees and the shrubs and even the herbaceous plants, right? They fall right over the root zone of those plants where
Mm.
they retain soil moisture, where they suppress weeds, and where they naturally compost, returning the nutrients right to the root zone of the plants. That sounds like mulch and fertilizer,
Mm.
right? But we've been trained by sort of the big garden industry to throw away that free natural resource and then turn around and go buy mulch and chemical fertilizer, right? So it's a message of think of living simply, reduce, reuse, recycle what Mother Nature's giving you. And that is the last point here. Like, how do you do this? Don't let them fall and cover your whole lawn because that will smother your lawn, which is actually a good thing
Mm.
because lawns are kind of the dead zone. But we all have some lawn, right? A light scattering is fine if you can still see the grass. Like that's not going to kill your lawn. If you have 3 or 4 inches, yes, it will smother the lawn. So
Mm.
what you want to do is get your rake, not a leaf blower, which are horribly polluting, right? Rake those leaves into your garden beds, your landscaping beds. Use them just like you would store-bought mulch underneath your trees and your shrubs and to insulate your perennials as they die back for the winter.
Mm.
I typically recommend 3 to 5 inches deep. It depends on what kind of leaves you're using. You're going to have to experiment on what works best for you. You don't want to pile, 2 feet high. That's going to smother your plants.
Mm.
But they're going to, settle down. The air pockets are going to go away. Water them. They won't blow away. And that's literally it. Just keep them on your property as much as you can. And if you have too many, to use just as mulch, which is where the wildlife habitat value is,
Mm.
then A, you can make a few more landscaping beds and reduce that lawn even more. But you can also compost them right on your property, add them to your compost bin, or even just make a big leaf pile in the back part of your yard, and they'll naturally break down into leaf mold, which is compost. It's leaf compost. You can spread that in the spring. So it can be very simple. It has huge implications for the local wildlife populations. It ties to climate change. It's free. So this is really think globally, act locally. We can all do this. And so we're hoping again with Leave the Leaves Month to inspire people to just think globally, act locally. Keep some of those leaves and it'll be your sort of small act that's going to make a big difference when we all do it.
Love it. You convinced me.
Okay,
Definitely.
I was just going
Yeah.
to ask, are you
Thank you.
sold? Did I
I
convince
am
you?
sold. I am sold. And actually, I feel quite relieved because what you've described is what I've been doing. Actually, I
Oh,
rake them
brilliant.
off the lawn, I pile them on the vegetable beds,
Yeah.
and actually it creates some great habitat for worms, which is quite useful for my fishing. So it all kind of comes around. There you go.
That's ecology. We
There
talk
you
about
go.
ecology. It's all about the interrelations between living things and each other and their environment. And yeah, dead plants are full of life, is another way to say this. Those
Yeah.
dead
Yeah.
leaves are full of life. Your dead perennial stems are used as nesting places by our native bees. Your dead and dying trees, that's where the woodpeckers are building nesting cavities. So, if you can keep any of those dead plants around
Yeah.
safely, obviously, you don't want a fire hazard or a tree risk falling on your house, but
Yeah.
wildlife will use them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. I'm conscious of time, and I want to make the most of what we've got. We've also got some people listening in. I want to give them a little chance to ask their own questions too at the end after we've finished our recording. So I'm going to kind of crunch gears and go into kind of careers advice mode. Yeah. So a couple of questions for you. I'll do them one at a time. What is the best careers advice you've received? Have you received any salient careers advice that's helped you in your journey thus far?
I've been very blessed to get a lot of it. I will say two bits of advice.
Hmm.
One was what I already shared with you, and that is do your work, always be prepared.
Hmm.
And, if you study and you have the right facts, then, the accurate facts, I should say, that's going to go a long way in making you be successful at whatever it is you're trying to do. Don't make stuff up, in other words, and just do your homework. So
Yeah.
that was a bit of advice that I received early in my career that has paid dividends. The other one is networking.
Mm.
Real importance of building a network of people in your field, in your career, path, and that doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be robotic, right? networking is about building relationships,
Yeah.
which can be tough for an introvert. And actually, I'll be a complete full disclosure. Looking back over my career over the last 25 years, I probably could have done a better job at networking,
Yeah.
because it does. I always say it's it's about what you know first and foremost, but the world
Mm.
that we live in is also about who you know, and
Mm.
that's how you learn about new opportunities, and that's how when others know about you and the good work that you're doing, that's how people find out about you, and maybe you even get reached out to apply for a position, or that kind of thing. And so I really encourage everybody listening, especially young folks, is really get out there, be social. And it doesn't, again, have to be mechanical or robotic. Go to a happy hour,
Yeah.
join a softball league, whatever, go a hiking club and just talk to people about
Yeah.
what you do and what you love and what your passions are. Go to conferences, join professional groups, be on LinkedIn as well as on Snapchat. Like
Yeah.
those are all important things to do to sort of build your network. And one thing leads to the next. And if you're in isolation, you probably miss out on a lot of
Mm.
opportunities.
That's great advice.
And
Yeah.
actually, I'll give you a real life anecdote. When I graduated from Emory, had a good degree, a good GPA. I had three internships under my belt with conservation organizations. I moved to Washington, D.C., where a lot of conservation work is sort of centered. And I was like, who wouldn't want to hire me? No one wanted to hire me, because it's very competitive. And I actually ended up applying to the National Wildlife Federation to be the intern for the Garden for Wildlife program.
Mhm.
And I didn't get it. Somebody else got that position. And so I ended up, I got another job at another nonprofit as an admin assistant, and then I was working the weekends at a nature center. So I was basically working practically 7 days a week. And
Mm.
I did that for 3 years. I got a couple of promotions at the other smaller nonprofit. It was a urban forestry tree planting group. And I kept in touch with the people that I had been interviewing with at the National Wildlife Federation. I went to their public events. I participated. Back then, it really wasn't social media, it was listservs.
Mm.
And 3 years after they didn't hire me to be the intern, they offered me the national manager position, as all just from networking. And also,
Yeah.
again, knowing my
Yeah.
my knowing what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. So get out there and, don't be shy.
Yeah.
Put yourself out there, be confident.
Yeah. Get out there and make friends. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Three quick fire questions then to kind of round things off. First thing, if you could choose one location and see one species, where would we send you and what would you look at?
Oh my goodness. You want a quick answer to this?
Yeah.
You can't ask a nature lover a question like that
I
because I
know.
can't pick
Sorry.
one. But I guess I'll just pick one out of my random file of things that I would love to see. I would love to, oh my gosh, I think I would love to see a cassowary in the wild.
Mm. So you'd be
You
going
know,
out to the Northern Territories, that sort of thing. Yeah.
yes, yeah, these
Yeah.
huge, big
Yeah.
dinosaur
Yeah.
birds
Yeah.
that are dangerous. They can kill you with a kick, right? Got a big claw. They're beautiful. They're reptilian and dinosaur-like, and just
Yeah.
so cool. I've seen them in zoos and things like that, but to see one in the wild, I think would be awesome.
Okay. Amazing. Love to make that happen for you. Number two, and this is a toughie, but again, if we can go quick on it, if I could make you a global czar for the day and you could enact one law or one decree to help wildlife, to save the environment a little bit, what would be your law?
This is a really great question that I'm going to have a real trouble giving a quick answer to. I'll keep it simple. The banning of residential mosquito spraying.
Mm.
I moved to the suburbs from Washington, D.C. I relocated. I'm in New Jersey, my home state, outside of New York City now, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So, you
Mm.
know, remote employee. And I can't tell you how disconcerting it is for me to, be doing this work. Like I will literally be doing this kind of thing and I'll look out my window over there, preaching about, living in harmony with nature, restoring habitat, and everybody on my street has mosquito companies coming, broadcast spraying pesticides, broad spectrum insecticides that will kill any insect during the day all over their yards. And again, we wonder why pollinators are declining, why birds like That is a personal one that drives me absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
So frustrating. It is a real problem.
Yeah.
So that's what I would choose. I would choose the automatic banning of that residential spray. And I will say for anybody being like, well, how do I deal with the mosquitoes? Google National Wildlife Federation mosquito. We have a whole series of blog posts and resources that offer better ways to avoid being bitten and controlling mosquito populations than hiring mosquito squad to come spray your yard and
Yeah.
decimate life everywhere.
Yeah. Great. Very specific, very targeted. I love it. Yeah. Final one. As a conservation sector, a community, we are still struggling to turn the needle and save wildlife globally. We're seeing declines. You've mentioned it many times on this podcast with birds and butterflies like monarchs and others. What does the conservation sector need to do more of or be better at?
There's also a long list
Mm,
of things. I'm going to say one that might surprise you, but that is, I think what we need to be doing more of in conservation is thinking more about people
mm,
and learning from indigenous knowledge and stop doing the things that separate us as humans. And when we realize that, sort of modern Western science-based perspectives have not done the job at saving these things, these resources, these species, and quite honestly, are behind a lot of the declines that we're seeing.
mm,
And when we realize that there are other perspectives of historical relationships and knowledge to the natural world that worked for millennia,
mm,
that we need to stop ignoring, and we need to acknowledge that there are all these other ways of being, right? That are important and are at risk of extinction themselves.
mm,
And sort of finally, when we realize that humans are part of nature and humans are part of the ecology and we impact it and are impacted by it, and that you can't have um, you know so many of the conservation problems that we have unless we view certain human cultures or communities as disposable,
yeah,
right? Like when we address poverty and racism and sexism and all of those things at the human society level, and this is a real holistic perspective, but like we solve those problems or at least make them a little bit better, we can actually begin addressing some of the other issues because the two are interrelated.
mm,
Poverty drives destruction of the natural resources. You
mm,
know, poverty is sourced in sort of the worst parts of capitalism
mm,
and an extractive perspective and a throwaway, attitude towards low income people and people of color and all of the people who bear the brunt of some of these worst environmental, sins that we have committed on the planet, right? So if you address those two things together, not only do we make the world better for people, for our fellow human beings, we honor indigenous tradition and knowledge in a way that hasn't ever happened. We actually can save our fellow species as well and the natural resources that we all rely on.
yeah. David, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom and your advice with us and our audience. If people want to find out more about you and your work and specifically about Leave the Leaves, where should they go?
Well, if you want to find out more about Leave the Leaves, easiest thing to do is go to nwf.org. So that's National Wildlife Federation, nwf.org/leave the leaves. And we've got sort of a hub right there with all sorts of information. And if you want to, learn more about me, I've got a website. It's naturalist.nwf.org. If you can spell my last name, just Google me. You'll find me all over the place. I'm pretty much on all social media as well. So I love chatting with folks via social media. So definitely give me a follow and ask your questions, and I'll do my best to answer.
Great. And we'll provide the links in our footnotes, our show notes as well. Yeah. David, thank you again. It's been great talking.
Nick, it's been my pleasure. Anytime you want to chat about any of this stuff, nature, wildlife, people, let me know. I'm always available.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks again. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career-boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.